Hey guys, welcome to let's see, reassembly / teardown part 4, I think. Today we're going to talk about the governor on this thing. I already started tearing it apart, and I know that's going to make some of you guys kind of upset, but we'll give you a detailed idea of how I tore it apart to this point, and then I'll bring the camera with me. I'm actually going to take this over to Rudy's because we have some things to figure out, I'll say. But I'll kind of show you what the issue is, and then I'll go through how I tore it down to this part, or to this point. If you can see this weight here, see how it's got that play in there? So the weight is actually worn, or the pin. I can't really tell until we get the weight out. And then this one here is a lot worse. It's not too terribly bad, but it is wore pretty severely. Well, I guess bad and severe are kind of two of the same. So it's not wore too bad, I don't think. It could be the pins that are wore as well. I'm just trying to look down in there and see the gap, but I'm guessing it's the weights, but I'm not exactly sure. So what we have to figure out is exactly how this assembly comes out. I'm pretty sure, see, there's a circlip around this front bearing here, and it sits in a recession in the housing, so I'm pretty sure this whole thing is pressed in as an assembly with the circlip in place. And the circlip is to prevent that assembly from going too far back to where the gear on the governor is not meshing correctly or flush with the other gears in the front timing cover. So I'm thinking what we have to do is remove this freeze plug and then press it out from the back side. So that's what I'm thinking. This assembly here also is mounted on this shaft, which I believe is also pressed in, and there are needle bearings, I believe, on this rotating assembly, which goes up through your upper housing, and then your control rod from the carburetor comes through that housing. So let me get kind of situated here, and I'll kind of show you how this stuff comes apart. Okay, so essentially this is what the governor looks like assembled. Okay, I figured I'd put it back together just for you guys. So first thing I do is inside here, this mechanism, you can see this pin. There's a cotter pin on the inside of that I remove, which is right there. So remove the cotter pin, pull your pin out, and then this part will separate. This mechanism in here will separate. See how that separates? Then remove these two screws, top and bottom. And your carburetor to governor tube with the linkage inside comes out as an assembly. There is a seal behind this plate. It's a cotton seal. it just sits inside there. But I'm going to put everything just loosely back together so I remember which way it goes. Okay, so that part is done. Then you can take the tower off. It's just 2 bolts, one front and one in the back. Then the tower's off. Now the stuff inside gets a little trickier. There is a bolt here that's a pinch bolt. If you see this gap, this assembly pinches to the shaft that operates it in the rear. That connects up to your hand lever. So remove this bolt. Set that aside. And there is a key on that shaft. So you have to be, sometimes you have to put a little bit of a wedge in there, like a flat screwdriver, just to get it to free up. But it should come off the shaft, and then the spring can come out with it. It just unhooks from the other end here. So that is your assembly there. There's the key. And then the actuating arm will just pull out the back side. And you can see there is a seal here in the back of the housing for that. It is wore. You can see it's an oblong hole, so the bottom part is wore. But if you look at the shaft itself, there's a pretty significant groove wore into, this is the front end of the shaft, or the outside, which is in this part of the housing. And then the back end of the shaft also has a severe groove wore into it. So I'm probably going to need to get a new actuating arm. And then I might have to drill and bush the housing behind this seal. So since we got it this far, let's pull this seal out quick. Okay, we've got the seal pulled out. Here it is. It's the original old leather seal. So we'll set that aside. And you can see how the hole has kind of an oval shape. The bottom is kind of egg shaped. So this is going to have to be drilled and bushed. So it's not too terribly worn. But the next step that we have to do is get the rotating assembly out so we can figure out what we're going to do with the weights. You can see here there's quite a bit of play in this one. And same with this one. So you might be looking at getting different weights, or it might be the actual pins themselves. And I have a couple ideas with these pins as to how we can fix them. So this will be to be continued tomorrow, I think, at Rudy's. So stay tuned for that. Governor Housing Teardown Part 1, I guess. Okay guys, we're back out here in the shop, and as you can see, the Governor Housing is completely empty. So this hole here and the one on the back side are for the actuating shaft, and those are the ones that need to be drilled and bushed. This rear one here is for this shaft, which has a little notch in the end, and that actually aligns with this indentation on the governor cover. So in order to remove this shaft to get this assembly out, which goes like that for the rod that goes up to the throttle arm. You know, that comes over from the cross tube to the carburetor. In order to get this shaft out that holds everything in place, there's a small circlip on the top side, or on the side with the I guess you can call it the machined step. You can see the groove where that circlip goes, but that is on this end. Once you remove that circlip, I just use like a small dental pick, or you could use an X-Acto knife or something like that just to get it off. But then you drive it through all the way out the back side. So that's what I did there to remove this shaft, and it looks to be in pretty good shape. There are needle bearings in this assembly. If you can see them in there. There's one there, and then there's another one in the back side. So that's how that assembly is removed. And then in order to get the rotating assembly with the weights and bearings out, I just used a large brass drift. Yes, I've got one now. And set it up in my vise this way, and then I pounded with the brass drift on the back side of the bearing cage here, not the inner portion but the outer race, and drove that out the front of the governor housing. So that's how that comes out. It's really simple. Just a few taps and it comes right out. So there's that. So this assembly here with this shaft looks good. I'm just going to polish this shaft, and the bearings work fine. I just cleaned it in a bucket of solvent, so the bearings and everything turns fine on this shaft. So there's no weird noises or anything, or scraping. So that's good. This clip will save. We don't want to lose that. Then the weights in the rotating assembly on mine, now I did some research. Some people's are installed with some countersunk screws. Mine were installed with pins that were peened or pressed on the end. So all I did was drill out the top portion that was peened. You can see on the opposite side it's still kind of expanded on this very outer edge, basically where this black line starts and goes up. So I just drilled that portion out, and then I drove them out with a punch. But these pins are very worn. This one's really bad. But then if we remove the weights out of the carrier, you can see that this one, the hole is pretty elongated in this portion, and same on the other side. So it's elongated towards this little notch on the weight. This one here, kind of the same thing. It's elongated towards the notch. And this top side isn't so bad. It's still got some elongation, if that's even a word, right in this area here. But which makes perfect sense, because when they fly apart, all the wear is going to be on the interior portion, because that's holding everything together. So we might be able to get by with drilling these out, but this one sure doesn't have a whole lot of material left right here, so I'd be afraid that it's going to crack and fly off and cause some major damage. So I got to try and find maybe some new weights for this, and then figure out what I'm going to do for pins. I'm not sure, but we'll get it figured out. I'm going to bring this over to Rudy's tonight and have him take a look at it and see if he's got any ideas. But that's where we're at. The governor's completely disassembled, and we figured out what our wear points are. It's the front journals in the housing for the actuating shaft or actuating lever, the pins, and the weights. So everything else seems to be pretty tight. the spring, I mean, while I'm in here, I might as well replace it. So we'll put a new spring in it. And all of these pins and the linkages seem pretty good and tight. So this one's got a little play, but it's not horrible. It's more back and forth than it is up and down, so that's good. This one here, you can get a rebuild kit for these from a couple different places, but it only comes with this end here, this little bronze end, some of the gaskets, and that's really about it. It doesn't come with any of the major parts like weights or pins or anything like that. I think it comes with a spring, but that's about it. So we'll get this over to Rudy's and go from there, see what we can do, see if he's got any ideas. But I'll probably bring the camera with me just in case, and we'll see what happens. But until that, I got nothing else. Okay guys, back from Rudy's. I brought everything over there, well, not everything, but most everything, to sandblast and clean it up to see what we're looking at. And it sounds like we got two options. The first, which I've already done, I drilled the hole in these weights from a 1/4 inch pin to a 5/16 pin, and I'm gonna hold off on drilling the brackets just because I've got some people checking to see if they have some weights that are not war. But if I can't find any that aren't war, our only option is to go to a bigger pin. So then I'll drill out these holes to a 5/16 hole and get larger pins. So with that said, from there, I'm probably going to have to find a new shaft. As you can see, this one's got some pretty severe grooves wore into it on both the front and back side. This one's a lot worse, but this end is the end that all the leverage is on with, you know, rotating the arm using the hand throttle. So that is what we'll probably have to do with that. It's either that or we'll have to build it up with weld and then turn it smooth. Rudy did give me a couple of bushings. He gave me a thick wall bushing and then a thin wall with a collar, and I think this is probably a better option than the thick wall, just because if you look inside the housing, if we use the thick wall, we're going to be getting really close to the machine surface that the bearing presses into in the housing. So in a sense, you know, the bushing will go here. It'll be pressed in there versus using something that's a lot thinner. We'll have to take a lot less material out, plus I already drilled it out to the biggest size I have, which is 9/16, but I gotta get a 37/64 drill bit in order to get this to fit. So plus the collar can be recessed in here behind the seal, so it's not gonna really affect anything. So that would be great. But other than that, everything looks good. The bearings, they're still good yet. And I took and polished some of these shafts. So we will see how everything plays out. But until I get a bigger drill bit and until I find out what we're going to do with these weights, whether we're going to use them with a larger pin or try to find, you know, the weights that are not so wore. We'll just have to figure that out when we get to it, but hopefully this can be back together within, I don't know, a few days, and then we'll move on to the water pump, and that's pretty much it for the engine. And then we can start on the rear end and get all the new seals in that, and then go to the front bolster rebuild. So, and then from there it's just sandblast, prime, and paint. So we're making headway. The engine's the tough part. So we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for watching. Thanks for wrenching with me, and thanks for being patient. So keep on sharing that GoFundMe. Let's keep it moving up. This is Suicide Awareness Week. So, oh, and also, real quick note, today is 9/11, so thank you to all of the emergency personnel, military, just good Samaritans. So thank you for everything that you do, and always remember this day. Don't ever forget, because some real awful things happened. So anyhow, we'll talk to you guys later, and I'm going to bed.